Oh, I can't hear you.
Wait, let her.
Welcome to another edition of Ask the Author. I am here with Glen and Debbie Kirkpatrick. Let me tell you a little bit about them. Glen is a 3-time, 35-year cancer survivor living with the late effects of radiation and chemotherapy. He enjoys sharing what he's learned about how to persevere in life, the importance of finding joy in each day, and the significance of living in the moment. And we also have his wife of 41 years and co-author, Debbie, with us as well. You guys, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book.
Thank
you
you
for having us.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So the title of the book is Overcome, a story of intervention, rescue, and redemption. And I want to ask you why this book, because I know it could not have been easy to write.
Correct. Well, I'll tell the end of the story first. I came to realize that I was working out for the first time completely or more completely the adventure, the trauma, the experiences. And it was helpful to me emotionally, and I felt productive every time I wrote, whether
Okay.
it was a page one day where I was able to write much more, or even some days where I was purely editing. So it was that exercise from my heart and head to write it out, and over time it came together.
Okay. And I just want to share, we've got our first comment from Dotine. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Overcome, living in the moment. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And if you are watching live or even watching the replay, please put your questions in the comments, and we will be sure to highlight them. So, Debbie, how did you feel about Glen writing this story?
I thought it was great. Everybody, when they hear our story, says, you should write a book. So he started writing actually many, many years ago, and then put it aside for a little while, and then came back to it. And then he wanted me to write, and I was the reluctant writer. I was like, he goes, but I really want you to be part of my, you've been my partner in this journey. I really want you to participate in the writing of this book. It's really important to me. So I was the reluctant writer. So I wrote one chapter.
But
The
you
best
did,
one.
but you did right. I love it. So I want to talk about something that is actually at the end of the book, but I felt was so informative. So you give, I read this on Kindle, so I don't know how many pages, but it seemed like a whole lot of pages. Your health summary of everything that's happened, and not just the many different types of cancer, but also all of the, like you said, the late effects of the treatment of those cancers, and just what's been going on the whole time. And what I loved about the health summary was how honest it was and how overwhelming it felt. And I think that's great because it really helps people understand how overwhelming all of this is. So, what made you decide to write your entire health summary?
Well, as I recall it, it was and it continues to be available in my health insurance member portal. So you see it as a list,
Yeah.
and it's updated. And in writing, I got down to, asking myself, do I include it
Hmm.
or not? I don't want it to be about me, and then that makes me laugh because, well, the book is our story in so many ways.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
and then I seem to recall also talking to who became a good friend, our editor, who encouraged us to include it as it was part of the story. And it didn't take too long. I became comfortable with the idea and then felt totally secure and, included.
I loved it. I loved it because I feel like with a lot of personal stories about cancer, I feel like the details are glossed over. And that's one of the most frustrating things for me is when I read, and I'm not going to call out any authors, but when I read a book and I feel like you have completely glossed over all the hard stuff. And it gives this, in my personal opinion, it just gives this unrealistic view of what it's like. And it shows only the good stuff, the highlights. So I love that you included it.
Thank you. Your perspective is very helpful.
Can I just add?
Of course.
Every time Glenn would have a doctor's appointment, there seemed to be a new diagnosis, a new thing. And I think that was kind of overwhelming to him. And I think kind of cathartic to be able to write it all down and say, okay, these are the things that I dealt with and are still dealing with on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, on that note, let's talk about Nuclear Summer. What year was it? And great title. And what did you mean by Nuclear Summer?
Well, it was 1987, the year I was first diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and prescribed the radiation treatment, which we agreed to have. And for the whole season, if you will, of that year, at some point, unless you remember exactly, I don't, we came to find, how could that be, but a lighter moment, maybe after it was all done, and just called it our nuclear summer.
Is that because you were in radiation constantly?
I'm sorry, right. Because of the radiation.
Yeah.
He had daily radiation treatment.
And again, I want to highlight the year so people understand this was radiation in 1987. This was not radiation today. It was not really targeted. Is that correct?
We would come to learn, sure, by clinicians, not as targeted in the field, and perhaps they meant the dosage too. So one doctor, one specialist I saw for CLL many years after called it like radiation then was like a hammer.
Yeah.
We're now picture a focused field or beam. So he knew the difference.
And since you brought up the CLL, do you believe that the leukemia evolved as a result of the radiation?
I do, because I was told that by one of our oncologists, and Debbie may recall that too. And
the chemotherapy.
I've read the
chemotherapy
material that it can be a secondary. Sorry, the chemotherapy, a secondary cancer.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of someone who had Hodgkin's lymphoma in college. I think she was only 19 or 20, and kind of the same time, mid to late 80s, maybe even early 90s, and she later developed breast cancer twice. And I believe her oncologist told her it was the treatment that you got, that saved your life, but led to all these other problems, and more cancer. And you talk about in the same part in the book that I want to quote here because it's so lovely. Some people thought I was some sort of cancer fighting hero, and I was no hero. So tell us about who were these people, and then what did you mean by you were not a hero?
Yes.
Just make sure.
Ready?
Look at the screen.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
Good.
You're good. Just keep going.
Yeah. Well, I seem to recall, may not be paramount, that it would be while in the throes of it, maybe like at the police department, and my peers sought to encourage me, and I would hear what I didn't feel like I was, like, you're a hero.
Why do you think they said that to you? Why do you think they called you a hero?
Oh, Good question. I've come to understand some things. So they weren't in the throes of it.
Right.
I was. They were young and healthy, relatively young and healthy. I was relatively young and, as
And
they
not as
thought,
healthy.
fighting or battling cancer. Um, I can now appreciate many of those comments more when I realize, well, here's what I think, that they were feeling vulnerable at any time they were feeling
Yeah,
or sensing their mortality with
absolutely.
some level of real compassion for me mixed in. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I can see why they thought you were a hero. At the same time, you not only thought you were going to die, you began to obsess about death and dying. And can you talk to us a little bit about that? And also, Debbie, what were you seeing as his wife and partner?
I would say one way to put it is it a sense of death and dying of that. It crept over me, and that was in during chemotherapy,
Glenn, how old are you at this point?
as in today or back then.
Back then, yeah, when this was going on,
31,
early
31.
30s.
So
Wow.
I'm really trying to express it rationally, but of course I wasn't thinking logically.
That's
So
okay.
it was it was uh, it was dark thoughts. It was
Did you contemplate suicide at all?
I did many times over suicidal idealization. Is that how you say it?
Yeah,
Um,
ideation. Yeah. Debbie, what were you seeing?
I was seeing my husband slowly becoming emotionally absent.
Oh,
So it was really hard. It was one of the hardest times of our life for sure. Um, I was a new mom. Our second son was just 6 weeks old when Glenn was diagnosed the second time with Hodgkin's lymphoma. He started chemotherapy when our son was about 3 months old,
mm.
and our older son was 4. So I had a 4-year-old and a newborn and a sick husband
Oh,
that was gradually, and we had just moved to a new city. So we knew nobody. We did have one friend follow us from Los Angeles, but um,
was this when you moved to Escondido?
we had moved to Poway
Okay.
in
but
San Diego County.
just adjacent to the.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Glenn moved departments. He moved to the Escondido Police Department at that time. But during his chemotherapy, I just saw him fading slowly away emotionally. So
Mm.
there was a dark depression starting to come over him. And it was very challenging, very challenging.
We're going to talk about your faith toward the end, but at this time, were either one of you going to church?
No.
I was not. Debbie was not. No.
Okay. All right. So we're going to save that. It's a little teaser for people. And again, if you're watching live or even watching the replay and you have any questions, please put them in the comments. And if you're watching the replay, we will make sure that those questions get to Glenn and Debbie. So 3 psychiatrists recommended that you have ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. And I will tell you what little I know about ECT is I remember reading one of Carrie Fisher's many books, and she wrote a lot of memoirs. And I do remember her talking about how she did ECT and how much it helped her. But there was a lot of short term memory loss to the point where, and she always made everything humorous, that the outgoing message on her answering machine, so it kind of dates it a little bit, was something like, if we have hung out in the last 6 months, I will not remember it. So please leave a very detailed message after
That
the
is
beep, you know?
that is
So
funny.
yeah,
That's
so can
funny.
you tell us about ECT? What was that like? What did it do for you? And then Debbie also, like, how did you feel about it?
Very good. I could speak to a bit of the mechanics, and that you're having the full experience. Again, while in the state of the major depression, I complied.
Ooh, good word.
I can't say that I decided. So I complied. Did I even agree? I went into the hospital and I had ECT. What it was like, though, is what I mostly recall is that as the ECT began to work, I became, while still in the hospital, inpatient. I began to be myself, more fully myself. And what did that look like? I do recall. I was more engaged in any group discussions or, let's say, a one-on-one with the doctor. I began not only playing games, but sort of leading board games with others at the hospital, calling Debbie, longing to be with her and our two sons at the time. And I called at least one friend, and it grew to be where I could not, in an eager way, feeling better, wanting to be out and at home.
Oh, wow.
And
Debbie,
so,
what was
yeah,
that like for you, watching this sort of evolution?
Well, he had, as we talked about earlier, the major depression, and no medication was working.
Okay.
So the psychiatrist recommended this ECT therapy, and I was like, wait a minute, he's already had radiation therapy, he's already had chemotherapy. How much more could his body handle? They
Right.
actually put you under anesthesia and cause your body to go through a seizure, and it kind of rebalances your brain chemistry. And I wasn't sure that I really wanted him to go through this, but I also wanted my husband back. The man that I'd known that was emotional. We had this emotional connection that was beautiful, and I knew I wanted that back. So on faith, I I was a brand new Christian at the time, because this is when our faith story kind of began. Um, on faith, I said, okay, let's try this,
Okay.
and it worked.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Did you, like Carrie Fisher, have any short-term memory loss?
I did, and I admit I have to defer to Debbie. What was that like? How long did it last?
Yeah, like we would come and visit him, and we were able to take him out, and we went. I think he was in there during Father's Day, so me and the boys came. We took him. We went and saw a movie. We went to lunch. He remembered none of it.
So you can just tell him whatever you want,
Yeah,
actually.
we had a great time.
It was fantastic.
I think I remember it now. I have to admit, how much of it is
Me
that I've asked
telling
Debbie
him,
and she's
yeah.
told me
Right,
over and over.
right, right. I'm so glad it worked for you. I'm so glad it worked for you.
Yeah, it's a miracle.
So let's talk about, so you were a police officer for your career, and I have never heard this before. You say this is in the police business, it's called tombstone courage. It's when there's extreme self-confidence, and it can be dangerous for a police officer. It can cause poor judgment and the taking of unnecessary risk. I love this. I've never heard of this.
Hmm.
Not that I have a background in law enforcement. Why would I have heard of this? But so talk to us about Tombstone Courage and how that played a factor in you returning to the police department, which you would take leaves of absence and then you would come back.
Okay. Perhaps what comes to mind is that it's in this section of the book to where complete remission, I would gain my physical and mental health, return to Escondido Police Department, and I felt like Superman. I was wearing the uniform again, doing the job that I had loved and been in since my early 20s. And it was a particular moment where I actually went on a foot pursuit, may have not been the wisest, across the, I guess, a 4-lane road and down an alley. And I didn't find the person with the gun. I think in writing the book, I thought, whoa, there was some really fun, freeing Superman. I got it. I'm back times. And while thinking that, well, Tombstone Courage is acting before thinking, if you will.
Right.
And in many life pursuits and professions, that's not going to bring harm to you or anyone else.
But in this one,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it came to mind about, oh, that's like Tombstone Courage, acting,
Did
then
any
thinking.
did any of your fellow police officers say anything to you?
No, in that um,
I mean,
that wasn't out of the ordinary on that time. Good question. If I had done like many things, there'd be a concern.
but you seemed like you were quite aware of it, though.
I would think that right in the moment, no. Did later I go, I didn't need to chase that guy. We could have got units or policemen all
Yeah.
around.
So
Can I
you recognized you took
Do you remember
unnecessary
something else?
risk. Yeah, go ahead, Debbie, please.
can I use just one example?
Please. Yeah.
We were at a police officer association dinner where Glenn was a speaker, and so me and the kids went to watch him speak. And as we were going out to the car through the parking lot, we heard a gunshot across the parking lot, which for me, that's not part of my daily life. For him, it was part of his daily life. He's like, get the kids in the car. And so I'm getting the kids in the car. He runs across the parking lot. He sees the guy leaving the my heart is just racing.
I
He
bet.
doesn't have his uniform on.
Right.
He
Does he
doesn't
have a
have his
gun? Does he have
vest.
anything?
He did. He may have had a gun. I
But
don't
no
even
vest.
remember. No vest.
Ugh.
And I was like, oh my goodness, what is he doing? But I'm just trying to get the kids safe, get in the car. And the guy in the parking lot turned around and he had a gun. He did not shoot at Glenn, thank God. And then Glenn backed off. And then the rest of the whole place where we were at was full of police officers. So they went after me and
Yeah.
caught up with them. But I was like, what is he doing? So this could have been part of this Tombstone Courage. I didn't recognize it at the time, but I was like,
Right.
what is
Did
he
you say
doing?
anything to him?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Then he came back to the car. I'm like, what are you doing?
What is wrong with you? You guys are so sweet. Oh my gosh. Um, let's talk about your retirement. You have a couple. There are many lines actually. I highlighted that. That you said it would take time for me to accept the possibility that life without full-time work could be meaningful, and that event was sad, but it marked a significant transition in my life. So you had several times where you, like I mentioned before, took a medical leave of absence, but you always came back to work. Um, what was the defining event that made you realize that you needed to permanently retire from the police force?
Great question. Well, with the chronic lymphocyte leukemia and the profound fatigue that would come on in increasing measure, I was allowed to work light duty in the office in the police department, not respond to calls. So I was accommodated. So
Okay.
even though I was taking reports, sometimes taking equipment out to uniform officers, I was beat. I wanted to hold on to my job though, and of course the hope was that remission would come.
Right.
So over the months and maybe year and a half, remission did not come. And to the point, and one day I realized it had been creeping in that it wasn't safe for me or anyone else it wouldn't have been safe for me to continue, excuse me.
Yeah.
As the fatigue would come on during the day and the afternoon to work in the field, I came in to the station, told my sergeant, who was already compassionate and prepared me, Glenn, if when it's that time,
Right.
to come in and no longer work in the field, right? So I told him it was that time. I worked light duty. Remission didn't come, and it became obvious I would need to retire.
Yeah. What was that like for you, Debbie? Because I know that had an impact on your finances.
Oh, yeah. It definitely had an impact on our finances. We,
The first time.
yeah, oh yeah. We sold our ranch that we had bought in Poway on 4 acres.
I fell in
And
love with the ranch, by the way. Like,
oh,
I fell in love with it.
the boys were
I'm glad.
5 and 9 when we left the ranch, and they still talk about it. Like,
Do
one
they
day I'm gonna
really?
buy back the ranch.
Oh,
So we went, to become renters. So that was different. And I mean, it did affect our finances.
yeah.
And, Glenn did what he could. He had 5 years home with our sons, which what dad gets that.
Yeah.
Looking back, it was very difficult during that time. But looking back, you're like, what dad gets to spend 5 years at home with his young sons?
Yeah.
Just doesn't happen.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Well, since you brought up sons, I want to talk about this decision that you made. I think it was right after this time. Um, Talk to us about you have your 2 sons, your 2 biological sons. You choose to adopt a young boy who goes by TK. I hope that's okay that we're using the initials.
Yes.
And I fell in love with him too. I fell so in love with him. So talk to us a little bit because I can't even imagine everything you guys are already going through deciding to take on more responsibilities. So how did that come about?
It was me.
Please, yes.
Okay, it's all her fault. Okay, so
You tell it best.
so I have to just interject that the way you just said that reminds me of John McCain's widow. I can't think of her name right now. Their last child they had together, they adopted, and she came home with the child from wherever she had been overseas.
I
And she
didn't do
said,
that.
yeah, that's what she did. And she said, "This is our child now." And he was like,
Oh my
"Okay,
goodness.
okay."
All right.
So how was it all you? What happened?
Well, in San Diego, they had a portion of the news called Adopt 8. And they showed these little children, pictures of these little children that needed loving families. And I was like, okay, we're past the cancer experience. Glen's working for the county of San Diego now as an investigator.
That's
Our
right.
finances are getting better. We still have more love to give. We can't physically have any more children because of therapies, and I had my own issues, but we have more love to give. Let's adopt a child. And Glenn was like, oh, I don't know if we want to take on another kid. And we started going to
Oh,
the
we're
class.
good.
And how old are your boys at this point?
It was in 2000, so like 11 and 15.
Okay.
So yeah, they were older, and we were willing to take an older child. Our
How
limit
old?
was 6.
You mean-
We thought 4
What's
to
the
6.
definition for older?
Yeah.
Yeah, how old
So
was
not
he?
an infant.
Right.
He was 7.
Okay.
So he was 6 when we met him, but 7 when he came to live with us. And it was one of the hardest decisions we ever chose. Like, we went through some hard things with the cancer experience, but
Right.
it was a challenge. It was a
Why
challenge.
what made you decide to do it?
More love to give. I felt like, and we talked it over with the boys, our 2 oldest, and they agreed, like, yeah, let's get, these kids need a family.
And
Everybody was on board until he came to live with us. And then they were like, well, maybe not. But
okay, I don't remember that in the book.
Yeah, we didn't share that in the book.
Okay, all right. Then I won't put you on the spot now. But can you tell us about TK, your adoptive son, his reaction to joining your family? Because that was so precious. It really was.
Go ahead.
for all that he knew how, he embraced it immediately. He was still developing in communication and obedience, I'll put it that way. So it looked like, to another family, it would look like, wild child, this isn't going to work. Well, we went in and adopted Terrence with intention that he'd be every bit as much as.
And he embraced having 2 older brothers. It seemed like he was all in.
Yeah, it's probably the best way, Andrea said. It was, our life became like put your life in a blender and hit blends. I mean, it was a swirl of unpredictability, and we didn't know what to do or say the next minute. We engaged with the help of others who supported us, but we don't expect them to do the heavy lifting in that.
Right.
How do you now have, what would you call it? The way the family was with our 2 sons, biological sons, introduce a young man you've never known who came with all his challenges, which we never held against him. We
Right.
believe other adults let him down and
Right.
didn't give him the opportunity, right? So it was chaos and a lot of laughter
Yeah.
and sweet times like TK would. See, I'm just starting to get. He'd be very affectionate with Trevor, now who's our middle son, and snuggle up to him, and Trevor reads a book. He wanted to be the big older boy to do all the things that
His brothers
they
were doing.
could, and they did include him in all ways that they could. And it would grow very, very trying as he got older, very challenging. However, now he's on his own. He works at Home Depot, and he's making his way.
Are your 3 sons still close?
Well,
Oh, you mean emotionally close or physically close?
Just emotionally close.
our 2 oldest are the closest. Terrence has currently, how do you say this, estranged himself from us and is not connected with Trevor, our middle son. We haven't given up, nor has Trevor.
I'm so
So
sorry to hear
currently,
that.
as we speak today.
Okay. Well, I hope he comes around. I really do, because
Yeah.
it just I could feel the love, and it was amazing. I want to talk about this time. You have retired from the police force, and you make this statement that I thought was just so interesting. You say validation would become an essential tool for my emotional healing. What did you mean, Glenn, by validation?
I recall that one or more times, or in some way, every time, a therapist I was seeing regularly then, we'll call her Melissa because that's her name, would know how to do this and artfully validate, help me, which then gave, perspective on, like, that's to be expected, or I could understand. I don't remember all the terms she said. I believe from that came where I was perhaps less hard on myself. I took it as part of I hesitate to say adventure, but the journey. So
If you were going to give advice to other people who've gone through cancer out there that are suffering from depression and suicidal ideation, what would you say to them?
reach out with everything you have. Strive to be honest, accept help. And this is a little surreal when I say that, because I know now what's best. When I was in that spot in depression, there was not a rational.
Oh, you're not rational. No,
Yeah.
not
To
at
get
all.
help.
I've been there. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. All right. I want to wrap up with spending a little bit of time talking about your faith. And how it evolved. But I do just want to share this really beautiful, I believe it's a Bible verse, but I highlighted it.
Mhm.
Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. And I thought that was just so beautiful. So,
Yes.
so Debbie, you were raised Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Can we say you were lapsed Catholic? Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and you mentioned earlier that you had just become a Christian. So, take us back to that timeline because I know it was really you first. What happened that you decided to return to the church?
Well, Glenn was in his dark depression. He
Right.
was hospitalized. And like I said, I had 2 young children, and I wanted to run away.
Oh,
I wanted to escape. I wanted to just like get out of this somehow.
yeah.
And I didn't have any place to go. So I had a friend at work that had been reaching out to me. Um, she actually came and watched our children, brought meals, cleaned our house while Glenn was going through the whole chemotherapy experience. And when he was hospitalized for depression, I had dinner with his dad and his wife, not Glenn's mother, but his wife at the time. And she was a Christian. And I was just expressing my overwhelmedness. And
Yeah.
she said to me, Debbie, you know, God keeps reaching out his hand to you, reaching out his hand to you, and you just keep pushing him away. And I was like, oh, it just cut me to the heart. Like, wow, she's right. Um, that is what I've been doing, and this needs to change in me. And so on the way home from that dinner that night, Glenn's still in the hospital. I said one of those prayers, you know, God, if you just take this burden away from me, I promise I'll follow you for the rest of my life. And the next day I went to work and I told that girl that had been, you know, serving me and reaching out to me, I said, I want to come to your Bible study. I want to come to church. I want to know God. And so I studied the Bible and I made the decision to make Jesus the Lord of my life. And I got baptized March 10th, 1990. And my life changed. I had a whole different perspective, a whole different lens I was looking through. Now this was a journey of faith. Um, you know, the decision with the ECT, I prayed a lot about that.
I'm
And I
sure.
was like, this doesn't, like, here I am, just a brand new Christian trying to figure all this out. And God made it clear, like, after, okay, I'm going to go to this psychiatrist, see what he says. I'm going to go to this, you know, every one of them said ECT was the way to go. And
Right.
I got my husband back. And shortly after that, Glenn studied the Bible and became a Christian. He got baptized June 28th, 1990. So he was a few months after me. And then it was like our marriage was renewed. It
Now,
was an
Glenn,
amazing time.
were you raised in church at all?
I was not.
Okay. Okay. That's hey, it's a kind of a yes or no question, so that's fair. Yeah.
Well, if there
Um,
was time, I have a funny story, but please.
oh no, go ahead. Go ahead. Tell us a funny story.
I went with my father to Stanford University Chapel for Easter. I was young and I came to learn why, because at some point you're able to get free flowers, and then he took and gave them to like his grandmother. And that's what I remember about going to church,
Okay, that is really funny. That is so funny.
if I remember it correctly.
Oh my gosh. I went to church with my paternal grandmother, who's Southern Baptist, is kind of fire and brimstone. And as I got a little older, it turned me off. But my parents didn't go to church except for not even Christmas, just Easter Sunday. And I'm not really sure why. I think
Mhm.
when my parents were still married, it was to please my grandmother, my dad's
Mhm.
mother. And what I find so interesting about your story that Glenn, did eventually follow on, my grandmother, that same grandmother, my grandfather never went to church with her, and madly in love. I mean, just crazy about each other, but like church was her thing that my grandfather, to my knowledge, never participated in. He
Wow.
just
Wow.
wasn't for him, but they accepted
Yeah.
that with each other.
Mhm.
It's interesting, but I was just really impressed with how much you really are transparent about your faith and how it has helped you get
Mm,
through all of these different challenges.
mm.
Did you raise your boys, including TK, in the church?
We did. We did. And our oldest son, it's a beautiful story. Probably don't have time to go into
Russell.
it today. Russell, he um, took on the faith at 14 and hasn't looked back. He's been a faithful follower of Jesus for how many? 20?
Since 1998.
So 20 plus years, and met his wife, and
Aw.
she's a faithful Christian, and they have a beautiful relationship. They've taught us a lot about faith. Like we look to them and their marriage, and it's been
So,
beautiful.
so
Oh,
yes, and Russ continued to be choosing to be immersed in the faith.
right.
He's led in many ways. Uh, our middle son continues to have a faith. He's still deciding, he's still finding himself generally, and
Sure.
we can appreciate that. And Terrence, he says he's not interested in God and in the faith. What we do know, no matter what he admits, is he did grow up in our home from age 7 to, early 20s. And so we have to believe some of that got in there, just the way we loved and treated him. He was forgiven, provided,
Right. You laid a foundation, I have no doubt.
There you go.
You did. You did. Well, I want to make sure people can get in touch with you. So I'm going to just throw this at the bottom here. So if you want to reach out to Debbie and Glenn, I have found that LinkedIn might not be the best way to do it, but please reach out to them. They are on Facebook. And as you can see scrolling across the bottom, it is just facebook.com/Kirkpatrick authors. Very easy to find them on Facebook. They welcome the opportunity. The book, once again, is Overcome. I want to make sure I get the subtitle. Overcome, a story of intervention, rescue, and redemption. It's available on Amazon and where books are sold. And I really appreciate you two coming on. If anybody is watching this and watching the replay, which often happens, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you have a question for these guys, I highly recommend going straight to Facebook. Again, facebook.com/Kirkpatrick authors. Thank you so much for coming on and doing a deeper dive into your book.
Thank you. We sure appreciate it, and appreciate your engagement in this and your humor. And
And
It was a
Debbie.
pleasure. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, Debbie, thank you so much as well.